Isaac Sarason is a skilled hacker, formerly employed by British Telecom-Sprint. When his health failed, Isaac did the only thing he could think of. He ran. He found a haven in a working-class district of the city known as Little Russia. There Isaac took on a new name, Ishmael. He then became embroiled in the affairs of a brutal member of the Lamadiza organized crime family, known as Leo. Convinced by his longtime friend Frankie to flee from his commitments to the Lamadiza family, Isaac found himself hunted by the ruthless Leo. On a rooftop, far from witnesses, Leo murdered Frankie. Only through the use of his skills as a hacker was Isaac able to drive Leo off. Wounded, alone, and far from help, Isaac depended on the kindness of strangers. One stranger, a burqa-wearing doctor known as Fatima, took pity on Isaac and helped him make his way to the mysterious Star X line. At the end of all hope, they found the Star X line and the slim promise that the enigmatic beings behind the Star X could save Isaac from the implants which destroyed his life. What do you do when those who saved you have recorded everything you are? What do you do when your every action is tracked by the Keylogger? Colbyjack.net is proud to present Firmware Keylogger, the third installment in the firmware pentology by Colbytrax.
Wipe that stupid look off your face!
Fatima interrupted my revelation with a tone reminiscent of my mother when she knew I could do better. But there was something masculine beneath the tone, an undercurrent of emotion which wasn't right for a mom voice. Her form said it came from someone who could be a mother. She sounded like my father. My earliest shame reactions, the one you learn when toilet training, were confused.
What?
I snapped back like a petulant child. What stupid look?
The stupid look which says, I just came across a bit of common sense, which I will treat as an epiphany, 'cause I have no fracking clue what constitutes a true epiphany. Every time you feel threatened, you make that face as you try to find a way to play the sympathies of those closest to you.
Fatima stopped speaking long enough to sip her own tea.
I could have, should have, would have said something in that conversational gap about how I couldn't control the way my face worked, but that was just being childish.
Besides, the firmness of her glare reminded me of my Nana and how speaking against her will was not possible. So I sat there, waiting for a chewing out I hadn't received the likes of since I was caught drunk with... What was his name? I'd been 12 at the time and had stolen a bottle of... What was the brand name? We had gotten drunk, and his father had naturally discovered us as we staggered around. Whose house had I been at? I shook my head, using an ancient habit which had no bearing on my current situation to jog free the associations I needed. No, wanted. Fatima must have thought I was attempting to negate her last statement, and like my Nana, she did not handle being interrupted during a moment of truth well at all.
Oh yes, my dear ghost of Isaac Sarason, my Ishmael. You have been faking your way to enlightenment, unwilling to do what every last one of us who have been left in your wake have had to do. You have always run from your problems while everyone else has lived through them. I don't think you have even the least idea of what it is like to live through your mistakes. Actually, I don't think you had a single bad thing happen to you until your implants went bad. Isn't that right? Was it your life, your school, job, relationships all laid out in an order you simply couldn't frack up, with people who'd bail you out whenever things became too hard?
There was an edge to Fatima's voice. The tone which said no matter what you said, you would just be digging a deeper hole for yourself. Her question had been completely rhetorical, and she was right. My life had been a straight track from St. O'Hay's computer lab to Jackson University for my bachelor's, to Adelphi on Long Island for my doctorate, and finally that flubbed job examination with British Telecom-Sprint, which anyone else would have seen as failure on a monumental scale and not a victory of deduction. But I had fallen up and not down.
I had failed my way into a career with one of the top IT companies in the world, and I had failed there as well. I had become bored when the work I dreamed of doing turned out to be closer to piecework and babysitting primitive AI code engines than hotshot programming. And with that failure, there was another promotion. Murray, with a desk like a ship, had been watching me, waiting for me to break. Of that I was certain, just so he could sweep me into his dirty tricks team. That is wrong. The team was clean. He had brilliant people on his team. He had people who in academia would have revolutionized their field, becoming that rarest of beings, a scholar whose name is remembered. I was the dirt he wanted. He needed someone willing to do anything to succeed, who also didn't have the chops to actually solve the problem themselves. He wanted someone who would look at a problem and say, I bet someone else has already done this somewhere else. All I have to do is find it and copy it and take credit for it, and I will be a star. That was the truth behind my run. The reason I hid my ailment like a wounded animal and didn't ask for help. I knew my reputation was fraudulent. I knew they would discard me without a second thought if they knew how much of my brilliance was theft. I couldn't risk letting anyone see me weak then, and I felt somewhere in my core that I still couldn't. Except now I had to. Wasn't it true that the first step in recovering from an addiction was admitting we were powerless over our addiction, that our addiction had made our lives unmanageable? What was I addicted to? Power? Confidence? Respect? Being the boy wonder? All of that and more, I was sure. One thing was true. No matter what the cause, my life was unmanageable. Are we done thinking? Fatima asked with a touch of impatience. I don't have much time. My bladder is about to burst. I didn't plan on being out this late, and VCD frowns on the use of catheters as it is. So, when I log out and disconnect from my SenseNet rig, I will have less than a minute to relieve myself unless I want to clean up urine. And I'm so tired I will probably collapse after guzzling a gallon of water, as I'm also currently becoming dehydrated. So listen carefully. I can see from your look that I just got kicked in the balls by an entire football team look, that you were coming to an understanding. My father often had that look. It meant he had just discovered he'd messed up something fierce. I like that look better than your fake epiphany look. Fatima pushed the tea service aside. Just looking at liquids makes my bladder spasm. I will help you, Ishmael, but there are a few conditions I need you to fulfill. Fatima raised a hand and signaled for the waiter to bring her the bill. Where are you living? I'm on a switching center in western Nebraska, I answered, not knowing where this was going. So, you were engaged in criminal activities, Fatima snapped as she signed a credit slip to cover the bill. She shifted in the chair and wiggled her arms into her leather jacket. Don't give me that look. You are engaged in breaking and entering, trespass, theft of bandwidth, and theft of service, and probably a million other charges, which would get anyone else a nice long stay in a prison for their troubles. If I'm not correct in my assumptions, just say so. Otherwise, nod your head like a good boy. I nodded my head. Of course she was right. She stood up and fumbled around in her pocket. She took out a scrap of paper and a pen. She scrawled something on it. That is my address. Send me a note telling me when to expect your arrival, and I'll set it up for you. What? I started to ask. You are going to be living with me until you can afford your own place, Fatima stated, as if it were the law of the land. And she held up a hand to silence me. You are getting a job and paying your own way. No more stealing bandwidth, access, or information. You need to live like the rest of us. No free rides, no criminal contacts, and no excitement. Just work and life outside of work. Nothing else. Fatima started walking into the restaurant proper. I followed. How am I supposed to work? I don't even have a body, I asked, incredulous. Fatima stopped suddenly, turned, and looked at me with a confused look. The look lasted a second before her face turned hard and unforgiving. You said you were living in a switching center in Nebraska. A switching center is a box about 2 feet on its side, buried where 2 or more network lines cross, I answered the implied question. And you were a bit larger than that, Fatima snapped. I get it. It's something to do with all this. She gestured at the world around us, all the digital artifacts counterfeiting reality. It doesn't change anything. You still need to find a job. I moved to protest again. Fatima stopped before the door to the women's room, grabbed my forearm in a tight grip, and whispered, Ishmael, you're a programmer. Didn't your kind actually make going anywhere optional for work? You're smart. You'll figure it out. Think of it as a game called life. Fatima released my arm and started to open the door to the ladies' room. She stopped and turned to me. When you leave here, you will think about what you need from me. You will then send me a list of what you need to live as a proper member of society. If it's computer stuff, don't be too cheap, but also don't be too expensive. Allah knows I can't afford an Apemapho null. She turned back and entered the women's room, saying, Now please excuse me. I have to see a man about a hose. The door shut behind her, and I was left standing in a mostly empty restaurant, wondering what life with Fatima would be like.
Firmware Keylogger is the third book in the firmware pentology. That's 5 books, if you must know. It begins where Firmware Proxy ends, which in turn followed on the heels of Firmware Hijacked. So you haven't heard or read Firmware Hijacked or Proxy, this would be a great time to head on over to Colbyjack.net and either download the podcast on the audio side, read the episodes on the visual side, or download the Colbyjack Sunday Reader issues 1 through 46 in your choice of either EPUB or Mobi. Firmware, Hijacked, Proxy, and Keylogger are all available in ebook versions from our store at shop.colbyjack.net, amazon.com, barnesandnoble.com, and smashwords.com. Just search for Colbytrax. That's Colbytrax. I'm the only one. A complete audiobook version of both Firmware, Hijacked, Proxy, and soon Keylogger is available for download through our shop as well. If you don't need any stuff, but would like to support our work, drop on by Colbyjack.net and hit the pretty little donate button conveniently located on the right-hand side of the blog roll. If you're on a smaller screen, the bottom will be found at the bottom of the page. Firmware Keylogger is released under a Creative Commons, non-commercial, attribution, share-alike license. Do what you want with it. Just don't sell it, and always tell people where it came from. If you received this from a friend and want more information about Colbyjack.net and our split personality website, just drop on over to Colbyjack.net and select either the audio or visual side. The audio side carries our podcast, while the visual side carries our writings. Whichever side catches your fancy is fine with us. We're of two minds about the whole thing anyway. I do mostly Twitter, so if you do the tweets and want to follow me, I'm Colbytrax. That's Colbytrax. Thank you once again. Remember to be fabulous and have a wonderful week.